What's going on, everybody? Kalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you 5 smartphones you can get in 2022 for less than $150. Now before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about any of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability. But with that being said, let's get into it. So up first, we got the Bluevue III. Now this phone, as the name suggests, is the successor to the Bluevue II, which I thought at the time was one of the worst phones I had ever seen. But the Bluevue III is actually a pretty big improvement, and while obviously being nothing fancy, it definitely does get the job done for basic activities. So with this phone, we're getting a 6-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 268, and an aspect ratio of 18:9. So while not being the best display out there, it definitely is decently large for being such an affordable phone, and despite only having a resolution of 720p, the image does look decently sharp. In addition to this, I do think the colors and brightness look pretty decent, and overall, if you're doing something like streaming the odd video here and there, browsing the web, using social media and stuff like that, the Bluevue III will absolutely get the job done. Now for storage, this phone is getting 32GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, which granted isn't great, but for a really entry-level phone like this, remember this phone is under $150. It really is to be expected, and while if you have a lot of apps and stuff like that, you're probably going to want a phone with a lot more storage. If you're really only using your phone for basic activities and you don't have a whole lot of apps, then I would say it will get the job done, especially considering this phone does have microSD card expansion, so you can always offload stuff like photos and videos to save some space. Now for security features, unfortunately we're not getting a fingerprint scanner with this phone, but it does have face unlock, and in general the face unlock does work pretty well. Now taking a look at the camera setup, for the front-facing camera, this camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a single camera here, and this camera is 13 megapixels. Now keep in mind, this phone does not have portrait mode, and in general, it honestly really doesn't have a whole lot of anything as far as features go. And the photo quality, especially compared to a lot of other phones in this video, is really not very impressive. So if you're taking a lot of photos for social media or something like that, then this is not really going to be your best choice. But if you're just using Snapchat, for example, where the quality doesn't really matter a whole lot, then it will at least get the job done. And keep in mind, with this phone for video, we got a max recording quality of 1080p in the rear and 720p in the front. So really, if using the camera, taking photos, recording videos, and that kind of thing is really going to be a primary use of your phone, I would probably avoid this device, but if you're not really going to be using the camera that often, then it will at least be okay. As far as RAM and processor go, with this phone, we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio P22 processor. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on it, and we're getting a single core score of 133 and a multi-core score of 781. Now this is where I was actually pleasantly surprised, because with this phone's predecessor, the Bluevue II, at the time it was honestly one of the slowest phones I had ever seen, but with the Bluevue III, sure, this is no high performance device, and if you're doing a lot of stuff like mobile gaming, or if you're just going to be on your phone a lot, it's still not going to be the fastest phone out there. But for what it is, I do think the performance of this phone is actually pretty decent. So if you're doing more basic activities like browsing the web, using social media, and maybe playing some really basic games with minimal animation, then you're probably going to get a pretty decent experience with the Bluevue III. Now this phone has a 3400 mAh battery, which honestly is definitely not very impressive, especially compared to a lot of other phones in this video that have 5000 mAh batteries. So if battery life is really a priority for you, then I would probably avoid this device. But in general, if you leave your phone plugged in all day anyway, or maybe again you just need something really basic that you're not going to be using a ton, then it will at least get you through the day. As far as other features go, unfortunately this phone does not have NFC, which honestly, seeing its price range, is not too surprising. But all the same, keep in mind, if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, you're not going to be able to do that with this phone. Up next, we got the Samsung Galaxy A03s. Now with this phone, we're getting a 6.5-inch PLS LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 270, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. Now for what it is, I do think this display is actually really good. Despite only having a 720p resolution, the image does look pretty crisp, the colors look pretty good, and in general, at 6.5 inches, since we are getting a larger display here, if you're consuming a lot of content like watching videos, reading, looking at photos, and that kind of thing, you will get a pretty good experience here. For storage, this phone is getting 32GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. Unfortunately, that is really a downside of having a lower end phone like this. Most of them don't really have a ton of storage. So again, keep in mind, if you have a lot of apps and stuff like that, you're probably going to want to look at a slightly higher end device than this. But in general, if you're really just a light user, if you don't have a lot of apps and data and stuff like that, and maybe you just have a couple photos and videos, then this phone should still be fine, because remember, it does have microSD card expansion, and you can always use a microSD card to offload stuff like photos, videos, music, and and all that. So if that's really all you have, then you won't have too much of a problem. For security features, we do get a fingerprint scanner with this phone right here on the power key, and it does have face unlock as well. So unlike the Bluevue 3 that only had face unlock, the Samsung Galaxy A03s actually does have a fingerprint scanner and face unlock, so it's nice to get two options to unlock it besides a pin. But that being said, let's go ahead and give the fingerprint scanner a try and see how well it works. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, it worked pretty well. Definitely no issues here. And again, remember, we do get face unlock too. So if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a 13 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So no ultra wide camera here, but compared to something like the Bluevue 3, I do think this camera setup is quite a bit better. And as far as quality goes, sure, it's not going to be nearly as good as something like a Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, for example, but it still will get the job done for stuff like social media and more casual things. So if you are taking a decent amount of pictures, as long as you remember this is an entry-level phone and the quality really is going to be limited to that kind of range, you will probably get a pretty good experience with the camera here. Now as far as RAM and processor go, with this phone we're getting 3 GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio P35 processor. I will say in my experience, along with the Bluevue 3, the Samsung Galaxy A03s is probably the fastest phone in this video. So if processing power really is a priority for you, but you still want to stay in this kind of entry-level price range, then out of all these phones, this will be your best option. Now that being said, I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on it, and it came back with a single core score of 174 and a multi-core score of 888. So again, this phone is actually decently fast for what it is. And while again, none of these phones are really going to be high performance devices, so if you're doing stuff like heavy mobile gaming, maybe playing Call of Duty for example, you're not going to be able to do that with any of these phones. And if you're really just going to be on your phone a lot, you will notice they're not the fastest devices out there. But if you're really more of a light user and you're just using your phone for basic activities, keep in mind, again, this phone is significantly faster than all the others in this video, and while in terms of processing power, the Bluevue 3 does come kinda close. Again, if you are looking for a phone in this price range and performance is your top priority, the Samsung Galaxy A03s will be the best choice out of all of these. Now for the battery, the Samsung Galaxy A03s is getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15 watt fast charging, so honestly, for just being a really entry-level phone, this is actually a great battery. With a 5000 mAh battery, in case you don't know, that's pretty much the biggest battery you can get in a US smartphone, and you're gonna get great life and longevity here. And in addition to this, while 15 watt fast charging is not the best fast charging in the world, not by a long shot, it's still a lot better than you would expect in a phone in this price range. I mean, the Bluevue 3 for that matter didn't even support fast charging. So overall, if the battery is more of a priority for you, the Samsung Galaxy A03s will be a great choice. And as far as other features go, this phone does not have NFC. So again, if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, keep in mind you're not gonna be able to do that with this phone. But in general, the Samsung Galaxy A03s is one of the best entry-level phones you can get. Its biggest strengths are definitely the processor and the battery. Compared to the other phones in this video, the A03s does have a huge advantage in those departments. The display is also pretty decent, and the camera and features in general are pretty good as well. So if you are looking for a solid all-around phone, and you still want to stay within this lower-end entry-level price range, the A03s will be a great choice. Up next, we got the TCL 30Z. Now this is definitely one of the more popular phones in this video, and despite going for around $100 factory unlocked, a lot of carriers have it too, and you can get some really good deals on it. In fact, I personally got this phone from Cricket, and I paid around $30–40 for it, and nowadays I have seen deals where you can get it for free. So if you're looking for a really affordable phone for just basic activities, the TCL 30Z is going to be a great choice. Now with this phone, we're getting a 6.1-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 282, and an aspect ratio of 19.5:9. Now while not being the biggest display here with the highest resolution, keep in mind TCL originally started out making TVs, and they put that same technology into their phones, and because of this, I do think TCL phones do have a really nice quality for what they are. As you can see here, despite only being a 720p IPS LCD display and really not being anything fancy, the brightness, viewing angles, colors, and just image in general do look really good. So again, while it's not the biggest display out there, you still are going to get a pretty decent experience when you're consuming content on this phone. Now for storage, like most of the phones in this video, this phone does only have 32 GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. Again, pretty expected expected in a phone in this price range, but seeing that it does have microSD card expansion, you can at least offload stuff like photos and videos, so unless you have a bunch of apps, a microSD card should make the lower storage on this phone pretty bearable. For security features, like the Bluevue III, this phone doesn't have a fingerprint scanner, but we are getting Face Unlock here, and I would say the Face Unlock does work pretty well. So while it is too bad that we don't get a fingerprint scanner here, at least we do have another option besides a pin to unlock the phone. For the camera setup, we're getting a 5 megapixel front facing camera, then on the back we got a single camera, and this camera is 8 megapixels. So as far as the camera features go, really not the best, and really this phone probably has the worst camera out of all of these phones, maybe tied with the Bluevue III. So honestly, unless you're just using Snapchat, where again the quality really doesn't matter, if the camera is really that important to you, I would probably avoid this phone. As far as RAM and processor go, this phone's getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A22 processor. On Geekbench 5, it came back with a single core score of 166 and a multi-core score of 575. So again, I do want to remind you, this is a really entry-level phone, goes for around $100 unlocked, and a lot of carriers even offer it for free, so it's not really supposed to be a high-performance device. And as such, if you try to use it for higher-end activities like mobile gaming, or if you're just going to be on your phone a lot, you will notice this is definitely not a fast phone. So if processing power is important to you, and you still do want to stay in this entry-level price range, I would consider getting the Samsung Galaxy A03s instead, because that phone is going to be a lot faster than this. But if you're really just using your phone as a phone, doing stuff like texting, making calls, maybe an occasional web search or social media post, in that case, it will be okay. But honestly, if you're doing anything else, just keep in mind, again, it will be a little slow. So again, if that is going to be a problem for you, then I would definitely go with a faster device. For battery, with a 3000 mAh battery, this phone is not great there either. But keep in mind, this battery is actually removable. All you have to do is pull this tab here like this. The back is going to come right off. And as you can see, the battery is right here, along with the slots for the SIM card and the microSD card. So definitely an interesting design, but the cool thing about this is, even though the battery is actually pretty small, if you're in a situation where you know you're going to be out for a while, maybe you're traveling or something like that, and you're not really going to be able to charge your phone a lot, you can always just get a second battery, and that's pretty much going to solve the problem. So even though this phone does have a disadvantage of not having a very big battery, I do think because you can switch out the battery so easily, it's really not going to be that much of a downside. Now as far as other features go, again, like most of the phones in this video, this phone does not have NFC, so again, if you like to use tap and pay, definitely keep this in mind. Up next, we got the Motorola Moto GPR. Now based on the general reaction to the videos I've done on this phone, it does seem to be one of the favorites in this price range, and honestly, for what it is, I do actually like the phone. This is really one of those devices that's not great at anything, but it's also not bad at anything either. So if you're looking for a well-rounded device, I do think the Moto GPR is going to be a good choice. Now with this phone, we're getting a 6.5-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 270, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. So overall, this display doesn't really have any special features or anything, but I do think it looks pretty good. If you're consuming content, watching videos, playing games, that kind of stuff, you are going to get a pretty good experience here, and while again, it's not really amazing or anything, it is still a pretty good display, and it does have decent viewing angles, so while it's not going to be the easiest to see outside in the sun, in most cases, it still will get the job done. For storage, like almost every phone in this video, we're getting 32GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so again, this is not going to be great for power users, but if you really only have a couple apps, and then maybe a bunch of photos and videos, as long as you have a good microSD card, you should be fine. For security features, this phone has both a fingerprint scanner and face unlock, so definitely nice that we're getting both here. The fingerprint scanner is right here on the back, so let's go ahead and give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. So if you do want an entry-level phone that has a fingerprint scanner, you're not going to go wrong with the Moto GPR. Now for the camera setup here, we got a water drop notch for the front-facing camera, and this camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a dual camera setup with a 13 megapixel main camera and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as the camera goes, this phone is really average for a device in this price range. It's not going to be terrible, but it's also not going to be great. So if you are taking pictures you want to keep, maybe for Instagram or something like that, it will at least get the job done. It's not going to be something like the TCL30Z or the Bluevue III, but keep in mind the quality is not going to be amazing either, and it doesn't really have any extra features like an ultra-wide camera or macro camera. So in general, while it's not going to be your best option, it's also not going to be the worst either. As far as RAM and processor go, this phone is getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G25. On Geekbench 5, we're getting a single core score of 133 and a multi-core score of 476, so definitely not the fastest phone out there. But honestly, in my experience, despite this phone having the lowest Geekbench 5 5 scores of all the phones in this video, it's actually really not that bad. I've tested it on stuff like social media, web browsing, and even some of the more basic mobile games, and while it's definitely not fast by any means, it's really not nearly as bad as this score might suggest. So in general, if you're looking for a phone for the absolute basics, like web browsing, social media, and then just using the phone as a phone, while obviously not being the fastest option out there, which of course none of these phones are, the Moto GPR is still not going to be a bad choice. Now the Moto GPR has a 4000 mAh battery that supports 10-watt fast charging, so while it's not great, it's also not bad. So if battery isn't really your top priority, but you still want something that's at least going to last throughout the day, the Moto GPR will get the job done, and the 10-watt fast charging is not going to hurt either. As usual when it comes to NFC, the Moto GPR unfortunately doesn't have it, so if you like to use tap and pay, again, definitely keep this in mind. And last but not least, we got the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE. Now as far as performance goes, this is not the most impressive phone here. In fact, it's actually probably the worst phone in this video as far as performance goes, but aside from performance, this phone does have a lot of impressive qualities that others don't have, which definitely do make it worth considering. So with this phone, we're getting a 6.6-inch PLS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 400, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. So yeah, this is the only phone in this entire video that has a 1080p resolution, and it also has the largest display, so if you are going to be consuming a lot of content, maybe you're watching a lot of videos, looking at photos, playing games, whatever you're doing, for that purpose, out of these phones, the Samsung Galaxy A13 will be your best option. Now for storage, this phone is getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, which in and of itself, in my opinion, honestly does make it one of the best phones in this video. With this much storage, you're not going to have to worry nearly as much about running out of space. And in addition to this, like all the other phones, it does have microSD card expansion, so if you have a lot of photos and videos, for example, that's going to help there as well. So if you're more of a power user and you do want a phone with more space while still being in the same price range, the Samsung Galaxy A13 is going to be a great choice. For security features, we got a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key, and this phone does have face unlock as well. So let's give the fingerprint scanner a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So definitely works real well there. For the camera setup, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So to make a long story short, the Samsung Galaxy A13 out of all these phones is going to be your best choice when it comes to the camera. If you want a phone in this price range that has the best features and the best photo quality, the Samsung Galaxy A13 is going to be a great choice. And not to mention, it's the only phone in this video that has an ultra wide camera, so that's definitely a nice benefit too. Now as far as RAM and processor go, this phone is getting 4GB of RAM with the Exynos 850 processor. Now keep in mind, this is not to be confused with the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G. That is a completely different phone. This again is the LTE version. But that being said, I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on it, and it came back with a single core score of 155 and a multi-core score of 572. So honestly, with all this phone's advantages, the processor and overall performance is definitely the biggest weakness here. Now that being said, it's not really terrible, and if you're just doing basic activities, again like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music, and just using the phone as a phone, you're really not going to have a problem here. But if you're doing stuff like mobile gaming and you're just going to be on your phone a lot, then just keep in mind the performance is not the best. It's not nearly as good as the A03s for whatever reason, and honestly the more you're using it, the slower it's going to feel. But that being said, again, for really basic use, it will absolutely get the job done. For the battery, this phone has a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15-watt fast charging, so I really have no complaints there. We got a large battery and we got pretty decent fast charging for an entry-level phone, so if the battery is a priority for you, the Samsung Galaxy A13 will be a great choice. But those were 5 smartphones you can buy in 2022 for less than $150. In general, keep in mind, none of these phones are really going to be amazing. Despite a lot of deals being out there, at the end of the day, you do get what you pay for, and these phones are really inexpensive, so they're obviously not going to be made to be high performance devices. But in general, if processing power is a priority for you, I would say the Bluevue III and the Samsung Galaxy A03s are going to be your best choices here, because despite their weaknesses, for what they are, they actually do have pretty good performance. On the other hand, if you want a phone with a great camera and battery, both of the Samsungs are going to be good choices here, with the A13 having the advantage for the camera, and both phones having really large batteries. If you just want a really well-rounded phone that's not really great at anything, but also pretty good at everything for what it is, the Moto GPR is definitely going to be a great option here, because while not having the best specs in pretty much anything, it also doesn't have the worst. It has a decent display, it has a fingerprint scanner along with face unlock, it has an okay camera that can take passable photos for stuff like social media, it has a decent battery, and while the processing power on paper really isn't very impressive, in my experience, the the performance has been pretty decent. Now on the other hand, if you're consuming a lot of content and you want the phone with the best display, by far the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE is the best choice here. It's the only one that has a 1080p resolution, the colors and image in general just look great, and it's 6.6 inches. It also has the largest display of these options as well. And finally, if you just want the cheapest option that's gonna get the job done, and you really just don't need any fancy features or anything, and you want a phone that's reliable and is gonna work as a phone and pretty much nothing else, my personal choice for that situation has to be the TCL30Z. Despite not really having amazing specs in pretty much any way, the TCL30Z is really affordable, going for around $100 unlocked. And again, depending on carrier deals, it's really not uncommon to find this phone for free either. But in general, if you're looking for an entry-level phone in 2022 under $150, I do think any of these phones will be pretty solid options. But I want to hear from you guys. Do you agree with my list? Definitely let me know in the comments what your favorite affordable smartphone is in 2022. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.